She thought it was just a generous tip from a stranger, but when Emily flipped the receipt over, her hands trembled, because the words written there pointed to a family she never knew, and a past someone didn't want her to find. Who was Kay? And what happened in Albuquerque in 1992? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The neon sign buzzed faintly above the rusted roof of the roadside diner, casting a tired pink glow onto the cracked pavement below. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator blended with the soft clinking of silverware. It was nearly midnight, and Emily was still on her feet. Her apron was stained with coffee, her ponytail loose from a long day of bending and balancing trays, but her eyes, though rimmed with exhaustion, still scanned every booth with care. Emily was 30 years old, though the days wore on her like years. She had started working here just after her daughter Rosie was born. That was 6 years ago. Since then, it had been back-to-back shifts, lukewarm paychecks, and a delicate juggling act of daycare pickups, utility bills, and overdue dreams. Her co-workers came and went, but she stayed for Rosie. Tonight was slower than usual. A single trucker sat at the far end of the counter, sipping decaf. A young couple laughed over a shared plate of fries. Then the door chimed softly, and in walked a man. Quiet, hooded, anonymous. He moved with an ease that didn't match the dusty air of the place. Emily glanced up from her register. Something about him, maybe the stillness, maybe the eyes, made her pause for a second. He looked familiar, though she couldn't place why. He sat in her section, booth 4, the one near the window with the chipped table edge. He ordered only tea, chamomile, no sugar. Emily brought it over, balancing the small pot and cup on a tray. "Late night?" she asked, half smiling. He nodded once. "Just passing through." That was it. No name, no small talk. But something in his voice, calm, low, oddly warm, settled into the corners of her memory like an echo. She left him be, checking in only once to refill the pot. When she returned the second time, the booth was empty. Just a tip on the table. Emily frowned. It wasn't the usual crumpled 5 or loose change. No, this was something else. Underneath the saucer was a folded receipt, and inside, scribbled in black ink across the back, were words that made her freeze. "We've crossed paths before. Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. She stared at the note, her hands trembling. Mother? The word hit her like a punch. She didn't have a mother. At least, not one she knew. Only a case number. A birth date and a box on an old form checked. Relinquished. Emily stood frozen in the aisle, the receipt fluttering between her fingers, the diner's hum suddenly drowned out by the sound of her own heart. Emily stood there for what felt like forever, her mind racing. The hum of the diner faded into the background. Her eyes remained fixed on the slanted handwriting on the back of the receipt. Ask your mother? About Albuquerque? The year 1992? She was born in 1993, and as far as she knew, she didn't have a mother who could answer anything. All she had was a thin folder from the state, a name blacked out, a few intake notes. Relinquished at birth. It was a phrase that had followed her like a shadow all her life. She used to imagine what kind of woman had made that choice. Was she young? Was she scared? Did she cry after? Now this stranger, this man in the hoodie, was telling her there was more. She folded the receipt slowly, sliding it into her apron pocket, then turned toward the kitchen, trying to gather herself. The late shift didn't allow for breakdowns. Orders still needed checking, counters still needed wiping. And at home, Rosie would be waking in 6 hours, asking if they had pancake mix. but the moment lingered like a splinter beneath her skin. Later that night, when the last table cleared and the cook clocked out, Emily grabbed her worn-out backpack from behind the register and stepped outside. The desert wind was cooler now. She zipped up her hoodie and looked at the near-empty parking lot. The booth 4 table still flickered in her memory, the man's face obscured by shadow. There had been something about his presence, quiet but purposeful. He wasn't just passing through. She got into her car and drove the 15 minutes home in silence. Rosie was sleeping when she got there, curled up under the blanket with her stuffed fox. Emily leaned down to kiss her forehead, then walked into the kitchen and sat at the tiny table with the overhead light buzzing softly above her. She pulled the receipt out and placed it in front of her. Albuquerque, 1992. There were only 2 people in the world who might know anything about her past. One was her old foster care caseworker, if she was still alive. The other was no one, because she had no siblings, no relatives who had ever come forward. Her records were sealed tighter than a vault, but now she pulled out her battered old journal, the one she wrote in when she couldn't sleep, and flipped past the usual pages filled with Rosie's milestones, grocery lists, and late-night questions about whether she was doing enough. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote 4 words in careful print. "Who is my mother?" Then underneath it, she added the line from the receipt. The last words he had written, "Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992, K." Her pen hovered above the page, unsure what to write next. For the first time in her life, there was a clue, and it came with a single letter. K. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Emily lay in bed listening to the creaks of the apartment and the steady breathing of Rosie from the next room. The receipt lay on her nightstand, smoothed flat and lit by the glow of a small lamp. Her eyes kept returning to it, as if willing it to reveal more. Okay, just that. No last name, no contact, just a memory she didn't have, and a city she had never seen. She grabbed her phone and searched. Albuquerque, 1992 adoption records. The results were disappointing. Legal walls, sealed documents, dead ends. She bit her lip and tried again. This time she typed Albuquerque 1992 birth records, mother, underage. Still nothing useful. Her fingers trembled as she typed a third search, how to find biological mother adopted at birth. Article after article, blog after blog, some hopeful, some heartbreaking. A few outlined steps, DNA tests, old caseworkers, state petitions, but none of it started with a cryptic note from a stranger in a diner. She leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling. Who would know her in that way? Why now? And why the secrecy? She whispered aloud. What were you trying to tell me? Down the hall, Rosie stirred. Emily got up, tiptoed to her daughter's room, and pulled the blanket back over her small body. She lingered a moment, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. Rosie looked so peaceful, so whole, and yet Emily knew the ache of questions that had no names. She had lived her whole life with that ache. I'll find the truth, she murmured. For both of us. Back in the kitchen, she poured herself a cup of tea and stared again at the words on the back of the receipt. Her heart thudded. Something inside her said this wasn't just about her past. It was about Rosie's future, too. If she didn't know where she came from, how could she fully guide her daughter forward? The next morning, after getting Rosie dressed and dropped off at school, Emily returned to the diner to cover a breakfast shift. Everything looked the same. The cracked vinyl booths, the sticky menu covers, the quiet hum of the neon sign. But to her, nothing felt the same. She walked to booth 4, where the man in the hoodie had sat. She ran her fingers across the wood-grain table, half hoping to find something else he'd left behind. Nothing. But she'd already been given the most important thing. A question that refused to be ignored, and she wasn't going to stop until she found the answer. Emily sat at the kitchen table long after Rosie had gone to bed. The diner had closed hours ago, but her hands still smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. In front of her sat the folded receipt. The message burned into her memory. "We've crossed paths before. Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. Amen. Her mother." The words felt foreign on her tongue. In 30 years, no one had ever spoken that word to her with meaning. Her earliest memories were of white walls, plastic toys, and caseworkers with kind voices and clipped goodbyes. She had been passed from one home to another until she was nearly 7. And then came the last house, the one where no one spoke unless it was necessary, and love was given only when earned. She pulled a weathered shoebox from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were documents she rarely touched: school photos, a hospital wristband, and her foster file. It wasn't long, a few typed pages and a single medical summary. On the first line, name, Emily Rios. Date of birth, August 12, 1992. Place of birth, Albuquerque. NM. Status, relinquished at birth. Maternal contact, not available. That was it. No fingerprints, no family names, no notes from a mother trying to hold on or from one trying to let go. Just relinquished. A word that sounded sterile but cut like a blade. She stared at the note again. Why would a stranger, a man she'd barely seen, who ordered nothing but tea, write something so specific? How could he possibly know anything about her past? She flipped the receipt over again and again, searching for some hidden clue, but all she found was the trembling in her hands. Her journal lay nearby, its spine bent from years of use. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. "Tonight, a man left me a note. He said to ask my mother about a city and a year. But I don't have a mother. I never did. And yet, there's this hole inside me that's whispering, what if?" She paused, listening to the quiet, the soft breathing of her daughter through the wall, the hum of the old refrigerator. Then a voice from the hallway, small and sleepy. "Ma'am?" "Oh." Emily turned. Rosie stood barefoot, her curls messy from sleep. "Why don't we have any family?" she asked. The question hit harder than it should have. Emily forced a smile. "We do, baby," she said gently. "We have each other." Rosie nodded, satisfied for now, and padded back to bed. But the ache in Emily's chest deepened. Later that night, she picked up the phone and dialed the last number printed on her foster file, the number for the agency that placed her. It rang 6 times before a message played. "This number is no longer in service." She hung up, then stared at the ceiling, eyes open until morning. Emily poured herself a second cup of coffee the next morning, eyes puffy from lack of sleep. The note still sat on the table, next to the manila file she'd thumbed through 100 times. She couldn't stop replaying the words over and over in her mind. Albuquerque, 1992. It was eerie how that one line had cracked something open inside her. She always thought the door to her past was sealed, bolted shut by bureaucracy and time. But now she felt it, an itch behind her ribs, a tremble in her gut. A door trying to open. With Rosie dressed and watching cartoons in the other room, Emily sat down with her laptop and began searching. She typed the name of the old agency first, New Horizons Child Placement Services. The search returned mostly broken links and court documents. Then she found a news article from 6 years ago. Longtime foster agency shuts down amid state reorganization. It mentioned that case files had been transferred to Children and Family Records Division, a government archive located in Santa Fe. She picked up her phone and called the listed number. A man answered. "Children and Family Records, this is Marcus." Emily hesitated. "Hi, my name is Emily Rios. I was adopted through New Horizons in the early 90s. I'm trying to find more information about my birth history. Anything you have on file?" There was a pause on the other end. Paper shuffled. "Do you have a case number?" he asked. She read it off the top of her file. NH99323, 184. He hummed quietly, typing. "That's a pretty old one, all right, let me check." A few moments passed. "Okay, looks like we do have a digital archive of the file, but I have to warn you, it's minimal, just a few data points. It says your mother relinquished rights at birth. No other relatives were listed." Emily's throat tightened. That's all? "Well, there's a case note here, just one, from a social worker named Rios. Same last name as yours." Her heart skipped. "Can you read it?" He just says, "Child retained birth name per hospital paperwork. Original birth certificate sealed. Mother signed voluntary waiver. No follow-up." That's it. Emily blinked fast, trying to process. "Did it say anything about where the mother went? A name?" "No, ma'am, that's sealed under private records laws. If you wanted to access more, you'd need a court order." Her fingers curled around the phone. "And the social worker? Rios? Is she still working?" "Not according to our system. Retired. Moved out of state, I think." Emily whispered a thank you and hung up. She stared at the wall, trying to piece together a story from the holes in it. The name Rios. Was it coincidence? Or had someone let her keep the name on purpose? There was something else. That man. The way he looked at her when she brought his tea. He wasn't just passing through. He came for a reason. She looked down at her journal again. Beneath last night's entry, she wrote, "What if my life isn't an accident? What if someone left a trail?" Later that day, Emily walked with Rosie to the small community park behind their apartment complex. The little girl darted ahead, her ponytail bouncing as she giggled and chased a butterfly through the swings. Emily sat on a weather-worn bench, journal in hand, staring blankly at the open page. For years she'd written in this journal, sometimes in anger, sometimes in hope. Letters to no one, to the mother she never knew, to the version of herself that might have grown up in a different house, in a different world. And now, with one stranger's note, the questions had become louder. She flipped through the pages and found an older entry from Rosie's 3rd birthday. In shaky ink she had written, "Today Rosie asked if she has a grandma. I said yes, but she lives far away. I wish that wasn't a lie." Now, she wasn't sure it was. A breeze picked up, flipping a few pages forward on its own. She closed the book gently and watched her daughter climb the jungle gym. Her chest felt tight, like something inside her was trying to stretch but didn't quite know how. That night, long after Rosie was asleep, Emily sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea she couldn't finish. She opened her laptop again and typed into a search bar, Rios, foster care, New Mexico. At first, nothing helpful. A few Facebook profiles, some LinkedIn pages. Then a listing popped up for a Maria Rios, retired, former social worker for New Horizons, now volunteering at a literacy program in Las Cruces. Emily stared at the screen, heart pounding. It wasn't confirmation, but it was close enough. She reached for her phone, then stopped. What would she even say? "Hi, I think you might be the only person who knows who I am?" Her fingers hovered above the keypad for a long time before she finally typed out a message through the contact form on the volunteer site. "Dear Ms. Rios, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Emily. I believe you were the social worker listed in my foster file from 1992. I was relinquished at birth in Albuquerque. I found a note recently that has shaken me. If you remember anything at all about that time, or about me, please let me know. I've never asked before, but I'm ready now. Sincerely, Emily Rios." She hit send before she could second-guess it. Then she picked up the old receipt again, the one from the man with the hoodie and quiet eyes. The ink on the back had smudged slightly from her fingers. "Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992, K." Emily whispered the words aloud like a riddle. A prayer. She had no mother to ask, but she was finally going to ask someone. Emily didn't sleep well after the night she found the note. The words had haunted her in the quiet. "We've crossed paths before. Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. But she didn't have a mother to ask. She never had. She'd always been told her birth parents were unknown, forgotten, erased. 2 days passed, then 3. She tried to push it down, telling herself it was probably a mistake. Maybe that quiet man had meant to leave the message for someone else. Maybe it was just a joke. But something about it wouldn't let go. On the 4th evening, as dusk rolled over the New Mexico hills and the desert cooled to a soft purple haze, she saw him again. Same booth, same hoodie and baseball cap, same distant eyes. Emily's stomach tightened. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart hammering as she walked over. He ordered tea again. Chamomile. His voice was soft, low, like it hadn't been used much lately. He didn't say anything else. Didn't look at her long, just stared out the window. Emily nodded, went to the back and poured the tea with shaking hands. When she brought it over, he thanked her in a near whisper. That was all. No conversation, no follow-up, no questions. She watched him sip his tea slowly, then place a 20 on the table. The tea was $2.75. No note this time, just the folded receipt, blank. He left before she noticed. Emily rushed outside the moment she realized he was gone. The bell above the door jingled behind her as she looked down both sides of the road. Empty. The desert evening had swallowed him again. A regular named Len, a retired mechanic who sat at the counter each night, saw her confusion. "You looking for the guy in the hoodie?" he asked. She nodded. Len leaned in, lowering his voice like sharing a secret. "He's been around here before, a couple times this year. Never stays long, just kinda shows up, orders tea, tips like money, don't mean anything, always sits in the same booth." Emily glanced back at the booth. It was the farthest from the door, half shaded by the light fixture above. She remembered serving it often, remembered the feeling that someone was watching kindly from a distance, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. "Did he ever talk to you?" she asked. Len shook his head. "Nah, just nodded, but he watches people. Not in a creepy way, more like he's hoping to see someone he lost." Emily swallowed hard. The note, the second visit, the coincidence of it all, it was starting to feel intentional. Too intentional. She returned to the booth and picked up the receipt again. It was blank on the back. But still, she turned it over 3 times, as if another message might magically appear. That night, she sat on her porch after Rosie went to bed. The desert wind was still, the stars sharp above her. And, for the first time, she whispered aloud the question she hadn't dared ask before. "Who are you?" Emily stood at the diner window long after the man in the hoodie disappeared into the night. Her apron still clung to her waist, the tips she'd earned forgotten in her pocket. Something about him. The way he didn't speak much, how his gaze lingered like he knew her, unsettled her more than the strange message he left the night before. She hadn't told anyone about the note. Not her manager, not the dishwasher she shared shifts with. It felt too personal, like cracking open a part of her soul that had been sealed shut for 30 years. But now, seeing him again only deepened the questions swirling inside her. Who was he? The bell over the door chimed softly behind her. Emily turned. It was Larry, the retired mechanic who came in every Thursday for chili and 2 slices of white toast. He squinted at her from under his oil-stained baseball cap. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily managed a small smile. "Maybe I did." He slid into his usual booth and set his coffee mug down with a thunk. "That guy," he said, motioning with a tilt of his chin. "He comes through here sometimes. Doesn't talk much. Always tips good. Sits in that corner booth like he's waiting on something that never shows." Emily's breath caught. "Do you know who he is?" Larry shrugged. "Not really, but I seen him around. Once at the feed store, another time by the highway turnoff. Folks say he just passes through now and then. Quiet fella, like he's looking for someone. The words hit her like a wave. Like he's looking for someone. After her shift ended, Emily walked home under a pale moon, Rosie's hand tucked in hers. The little girl was humming, skipping cracks in the sidewalk, her energy endless even after a long day. "Mommy," Rosie asked, "is there anyone else like us?" Emily hesitated. "What do you mean, baby?" Do we have people like grandparents or uncles, like my friend Layla has?" Emily crouched down, brushing a lock of hair behind her daughter's ear. "We have each other, Rosie. That's the most important thing. But what if we had more, and we just don't know them yet?" Emily swallowed hard. "Maybe someday," she said. "Maybe." That night, after Rosie fell asleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her journal. She didn't know how to describe what she was feeling, so she wrote what she could. "There's a man who knows something. About me. About a past I don't remember. I don't know if I'm ready for the answers, but I think I need to find out why he came here. Why now?" She paused, then added, "Maybe someone is finally trying to find me." The next day, Emily arrived at the diner before sunrise. The air still held a trace of chill, and the town hadn't yet stirred awake. She walked past the empty booths with a deliberate step, eyes locking on the one in the far corner, the one he always chose. It looked the same, unremarkable, but now it felt different, like it carried weight, memory, intention. She sat there, sliding into the same spot he had used, and traced her fingers over the formica table edge. No note today, no message scribbled on a receipt. Just absence. "Acting someone?" her manager Carla teased as she walked by with the coffee pot. Emily shook her head, trying to act normal, just catching my breath before the rush. But she couldn't let go of the feeling that this wasn't random. The man hadn't just dropped a cryptic message and vanished. He'd come back. He sat in her section again. He had to know that she saw the note, that she'd read it, and yet he offered no follow-up, no explanation. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, a pull, a hum in her bones. After her shift, she didn't go home. Instead, she walked the town. She stopped at the hardware store where Larry said the man had been seen. She asked the clerk, a teenager with sleepy eyes, if he remembered anyone fitting the description. The kid shrugged and said maybe. There was a guy who bought gloves a few weeks ago. Didn't talk much. Then she walked to the feed store. Same story. A quiet man. Kind eyes. Baseball cap. Always alone. Every piece added weight to the puzzle. He wasn't a traveler just passing through. He'd been watching. Waiting. For her? Emily returned to the diner after dark. It was nearly empty, the neon sign humming outside in the cold wind. Carla raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you clock out hours ago?" "I just wanted to check something." Carla smiled faintly. "You look like a woman chasing ghosts." "Maybe I am." Emily went to the corner booth again. Sat. Waited. An hour passed. She scribbled in her journal. If I was supposed to ask about Albuquerque in 1992, maybe that's where I should start. She paused, staring down at the paper. Her pen hovered before she wrote one final line. What if my life hasn't started yet? Because I've never known where it began. As she closed the journal, a gust of wind pushed open the diner door. She turned quickly, but it wasn't him. Just an old man shuffling in from the cold. Disappointed, she rose to leave. But before she did, she glanced back at the booth one last time, and beneath the napkin dispenser, folded carefully, was something new. A bus schedule. The route? Albuquerque. Emily's fingers trembled as she picked it up. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a clue. It was a direction. And now, for the first time in her life, she had somewhere to go. The glow from the laptop lit only half of Keanu's face as he sat in the dim room of a small motel on the edge of town. He hadn't unpacked. He never did. A duffel bag rested near the bed. His coat still hung over the chair. A steaming mug of tea sat untouched beside him. On the screen, a familiar site loaded. A blog he managed quietly under a false name. No followers, no fanfare. Just a quiet space where he asked questions and the world answered in whispers. He stared at the blinking cursor, then typed slowly. Had you ever discovered something small that completely changed your life? He read it twice before hitting publish. Then he waited. It didn't take long. The first reply arrived within minutes. I found an old cassette tape in my grandma's attic. It had my father's voice. He died before I was born. I've never heard him before. It broke me and healed me all at once. Another followed. A necklace. Cheap. Plastic. My mom gave it to me when I was 4. I wore it when they took me into foster care. I lost it at 13. Found it again last year at a flea market. It still had my name scratched on the back. Then another. My son drew me a picture the night before he passed. I found it tucked behind a mirror months later. It reminded me that I was still his mom, even after. Keanu read slowly, carefully. He didn't scroll past them like headlines. He let each one settle in his chest before moving on. Then came the post that stopped him cold. I found my brother through a receipt. That was all it said. No context, no name, no punctuation after the period. His hand hovered over the trackpad. It wasn't Emily's writing. He knew that. The tone was different, the phrasing clipped and dry, but the resemblance was unmistakable. A stranger, a receipt, a story waiting to be unwrapped. He clicked bookmark. It wasn't her story, but it could have been. Or maybe it would be. Soon. Keanu leaned back in the creaky motel chair, fingers steepled under his chin. The words from the blog post, I found my brother through a receipt, played over and over in his mind. He wasn't sure what compelled him to bookmark it. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was foreshadowing. Or maybe it was the universe sending him a quiet nod. He refreshed the page again. More replies now, some raw, some hopeful. All of them real. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it. It turned out to be my birth mother's voice, recorded years before. She'd been trying to find me. An old matchbox with a diner's name on it. Inside, a name written in pen. I looked it up and it led me to the man who turned out to be my grandfather. Keanu closed his eyes. Each story was a thread, proof that people leave marks, even when they don't mean to. That sometimes the smallest things carry the greatest weight. Across town, Emily sat on her couch, staring at her open journal. She had copied the note from the receipt word for word. Underneath, in her own handwriting, she'd scribbled every possible interpretation of the message. Who was Kay? Why her mother? Why Albuquerque? She didn't know if the note was meant to comfort her or crack her world open. Rosie was asleep in the next room, curled under a threadbare blanket that Emily had once taken from a shelter when no one was looking. Her daughter always asked about family, about birthdays with cousins, about grandparents who were only pictures on other kids' walls. And Emily always found a way to deflect. But this time, she couldn't. The receipt sat beside her journal, pressed flat inside a plastic sleeve like a historical document. She touched it gently, then looked up at the clock. Past midnight. Still, she didn't want to sleep. She turned on the television and flipped through the channels mindlessly until a familiar face appeared on the screen. A movie she hadn't seen in years. Keanu Reeves. Quiet, kind, steady. Her eyes narrowed. The cap, the stillness, the tip. Could it be? Was that him? Her stomach tightened. It didn't make sense. Why would someone like him walk into her nowhere diner and leave her a message like that? Unless it did mean something. Unless he wasn't a stranger. Back at the motel, Keanu typed another question into his journal. This one wasn't meant for the blog. It was for himself. What if the only way to find your family is to help someone else find theirs first? Morning broke, soft and golden over the diner's cracked windows. Emily poured coffee in silence, her hands moving on autopilot. The usual crowd shuffled in, truckers, locals, the quiet nurse who always sat near the jukebox. But today, the air felt charged, like something was about to break loose. Between orders, she checked her phone. Still nothing from the agency. She had left 2 voicemails, sent an email, even asked a local librarian if the building was still standing. It wasn't. The agency had been shut down more than a decade ago. The records, she was told, were either destroyed or stored in state archives, sealed by law. Emily tried not to let the weight of that crush her. Then, just after noon, the bell over the door chimed. It wasn't him, but the man who entered looked familiar. He wasn't from town, but something about his eyes made her pause. He wore a dark flannel shirt and moved like someone used to searching, slow, careful, like the room might change if he blinked too long. He ordered water and sat in the booth across from where Keanu had been. Emily brought the glass, setting it down gently. Their eyes met for a moment. "Busy day?" the man asked. She nodded. "Always." He smiled faintly and looked away. Later, when she wiped the counter, she couldn't stop glancing over. The man pulled out a small notebook, scribbled something, then closed it tight. Something about that gesture stirred her. That night, after closing, Emily returned to the blog. She reread the prompt. Have you ever discovered something small that completely changed your life? And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She replied, I once got a receipt with a message. No name, just a clue. About a mother I never knew. About a city I've never been to. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. And now, I can't stop digging, even though I'm scared of what I'll find. She hit post and sat back. 2 minutes later, someone replied, they're not with advice, not with answers. Just quote, sometimes the smallest crack lets the truth in. Emily stared at those words, then whispered them aloud. In a motel not far from town, Keanu smiled gently as he bookmarked the reply. He didn't know what Emily would do next. But she had crossed a line, one she couldn't uncross. The story had moved forward, the search had begun. And this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about the one person she never knew existed, the brother waiting on the other side of the truth. The drive to the old courthouse was quiet. Emily kept glancing at the note again. Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't just nudge your curiosity. It unsettles your whole foundation. She'd never had a mother to ask, only blank spaces and whispers from caseworkers too tired to remember her face. Still, the road to Albuquerque felt like the only one that hadn't already ended in silence. The building stood like a time capsule, sun-bleached and stubborn. Emily stepped inside, the smell of old paper and disinfectant clinging to the halls. She asked at the front desk if anyone still worked who had handled foster cases from the 90s. The receptionist was kind but confused, shuffling through lists before pointing toward a door down the hall. Try room 204. Ms. Rios volunteers part-time. She was with the agency before it shut down. Emily knocked gently. The woman inside looked up. Early 70s, thin glasses, and the tired but alert eyes of someone who'd seen too many endings. Can I help you? I'm looking for information about a girl, placed in foster care in 1992. Name was Emily. Birthplace, Albuquerque. No parents listed. Mrs. Rios blinked twice, then slowly leaned back in her chair. That name, she said softly. That name I remember. Emily's heart jumped. I was young then, Miss Rios continued, rising from her seat. But there was a case I never forgot. A girl surrendered by a teen mother. Confidential file. The brother tried to fight it, but he wasn't old enough to stop it. Follow me. They walked in silence to a records room that smelled of dust and cardboard. Most boxes were labeled and sealed, but one in the corner was open, a small blue tag hanging from the side. Ms. Rios pulled it out, carefully, resting it on a metal cart. "These archives shouldn't even still be here," she muttered. "They were supposed to be shredded when the state digitized everything, but I kept this one. Something told me it wasn't finished." She opened the box, layer by layer. Paper clippings, medical forms, custody notes. Then something fell loose. A small Polaroid photo. A toddler girl, arms reaching out, eyes wide. Holding her from behind was a teenage boy with the same dark eyes and guarded smile Emily saw in the mirror every morning. Mrs. Rios picked it up gently. "That's Jonah," she said. "Your brother." Emily's knees weakened. She steadied herself against the edge of the cart. "Brother?" Mrs. Rios nodded. "He was 6 when you were born. Your mother, Lena, was just 16. Their father, your grandfather, was strict, old-fashioned. He made her give you up, said it would ruin their family. Lena wasn't even allowed to hold you after birth. But Jonah, he fought. He asked about you every year, until the agency closed." Emily looked down at the image again, stunned by the resemblance. 1,000 questions raced through her, but all she could whisper was, "He never stopped looking?" Ms. Rios reached into the box one more time and unfolded a small, creased piece of notebook paper. This came years later. He mailed it after we shut down, said if we ever reopened the file, to give this to you. Emily took the note, hands trembling. The note was written in thick pencil on lined paper, smudged in places like it had been handled too many times. Emily stared at the handwriting, which was blocky and uneven, clearly a child's. "To my sister Emily, I don't know where you are, but I think about you every day. I tried to keep you. I swear I did. I was just a kid too. I hope you're safe. I hope you're happy. If you ever find this, please know you were always mine. Jonah." Emily pressed the paper to her chest. She had held on to silence for so long, carried questions no one had answered, but now, in this forgotten courthouse file, was something better than answers. It was proof that someone had loved her, that she had not been completely forgotten. Mrs. Rios sat quietly, letting her process it. "We don't see this very often," she said gently. "The ones who fight to remember, they get tired, they give up. But Jonah, he never did." "Where is he now?" Emily asked, still holding the note. "I don't know exactly. Last I heard, he went into social work, worked with foster kids in Arizona. There might be a paper trail. I can help you look." Emily nodded, still stunned. She looked again at the photo of herself as a toddler. That little girl had felt so alone, but she hadn't been. That night, back at her small apartment above the diner, Emily lit a candle next to the photograph. Rosie was already asleep in her little bed, curled around a stuffed giraffe. Emily sat by the window, holding the old note and her journal side by side. For the first time in years, she didn't write a question. She wrote a name. "Jonah, I don't know you yet, but I think I've always missed you." Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Rios had texted her a scanned file. A job application Jonah had once submitted to a foster youth program in Phoenix. It included a mailing address. She stared at it for a long time. It didn't seem real. How could a folded receipt from a stranger in a hoodie unravel everything she thought she knew about her life? Downstairs, the diner was quiet. The late shift had ended, but Emily was wide awake. Her fingers traced the note's edges again. A brother, a mother, Albuquerque. Then something hit her. The man in the hoodie. Keanu. He had written, "Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. Not your caseworker? Not your file? Your mother. Had Keanu known her personally? But how? She pulled out her phone and typed Keanu Reeves, Albuquerque, 1992, into the search bar. Nothing relevant popped up, just film trivia and timelines. But her gut told her this wasn't random. Who leaves a message like that unless they know? Who watches a woman with such quiet intensity unless they care? And why her? She closed her laptop and looked again at the receipt he'd written on. Folded, precise, no flourish, just that one haunting sentence. She whispered it aloud like it might cast a spell. Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. But I don't have a mother, do I? The next morning, Emily returned to the courthouse. Ms. Rios had already pulled a few more files, faded photocopies, old addresses, names long out of circulation. There wasn't much, but there was just enough. This one, Miss Rios said, handing her a document with a faint county seal. Jonah was placed with an aunt for a short time. She passed away when he was 15. After that, he was in and out of group homes. Still tried to find you. Emily ran her fingers across the pages. And our mother? Ms. Rios exhaled slowly. Lena. I remember her. She was just a girl herself when she gave birth. There were no parents in the picture. The courts stepped in. Lena was told it was for the best, that the baby would have a better life. She paused. She tried to change her mind. Too late. Emily's heart ached. Did she ever come back? Try to find me? I don't know, I'm sorry. After the case closed, it was out of our hands. But I can tell you this. Some girls who lose their babies come back years later, quietly, looking for records, for names, for faces. Back home, Emily sat with Rosie on the worn living room rug. The little girl stacked blocks and asked, Mommy, do I have an uncle? Ellery stared at her. You might, she said, gently. Rosie beamed. Can I meet him? I hope so. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her fingers hovered over the mailing address Miss Rios had found for Jonah. It was from 2 years ago, but it was something. She pulled out a clean sheet of paper and started writing. Dear Jonah, I don't know if you'll remember me, or if this will even reach you. My name is Emily. I believe I'm your sister. She stopped. The word sister made her chest tighten, a word she had never used about herself before. She kept writing. About the receipt, the diner, the photo, the old caseworker, about her daughter, and the feeling that something big had just shifted in her life. She folded the letter carefully and addressed the envelope, unsure of what would happen next, unsure if anything would. But for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt like a thread. Outside the diner that evening, a man in a hoodie watched from the far end of the parking lot. He didn't enter, just leaned against a lamppost, hands tucked into his jacket, eyes soft. He saw her through the window, refilling coffee cups, her eyes distant but not empty. He smiled faintly. The next chapter had already begun, and he wouldn't need to be there for the ending, just the beginning. Emily sat in her car long after the engine stopped. The courthouse parking lot was nearly empty now, but she couldn't move. Her hands trembled as she stared down at the photo Ms. Rios had handed her. There she was, a toddler maybe 2 years old, cheeks full, curly hair wild and wind-blown. But it wasn't just her in the photo. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, held her protectively. He had a crooked smile and eyes that matched hers too closely to be coincidence. Mrs. Rios had said his name like it was something sacred, Jonah. Emily whispered it to herself now, testing the way it felt on her tongue. Like a word from a foreign language she was just beginning to remember. Jonah. She'd never heard it before, but it stirred something. A feeling that someone had once held her with love, that maybe she hadn't been entirely forgotten. When she got home, Rosie was already asleep. Emily quietly pulled out her journal and began to write. Not the usual short, tired entries. This was different. Her pen moved without hesitation, questions pouring out like a broken dam. "Who are you, Jonah? Did you know I was out here? Did you try to find me? Why did no one ever tell me about you?" Her handwriting grew more frantic. "Did you give up?" She stopped, exhaling hard. That word, give up, felt too heavy, too wrong. Everything Ms. Rios said today suggested Jonah hadn't stopped trying. Emily remembered the way Ms. Rios's voice cracked. "That boy came into my office every year on your birthday, every year, asking if anyone had found you." That didn't sound like giving up. Emily flipped back through her journal, landing on the page she'd written the night after the receipt. "Ask your mother about Albuquerque 1992. The word still haunted her. Now, they weren't just haunting, they were real. Albuquerque 1992. A boy holding a baby girl. A name she had never heard until today. She opened her laptop, eyes scanning government directories, social media platforms, and old news archives. It took her hours, but eventually she found something, a staff page for a nonprofit based in Arizona. Jonah Vargas, Director of Community Outreach. His photo was older, of course, but the smile was unmistakable. Same kind, crooked grin. Same eyes. Emily leaned back, stunned. It was him. But instead of relief, a wall of hesitation rose inside her. This man had been looking for her, maybe his whole life, and yet she didn't even know what to say. What if he didn't remember? What if it was all a mistake? Then came the knock on the door. Quiet, almost polite. When she opened it, no one was there, only a small package resting on the welcome mat. Emily carried the small package inside with cautious hands. There was no return address, no markings beyond her name, handwritten in black ink. The paper was thick, the handwriting slanted and sure. She sat down at the kitchen table, Rosie's art supplies scattered beside her, and peeled the tape back slowly. Inside, she found a brown envelope and a folded slip of paper. The note was brief, only 6 words written in the same hand. "Look at the work he's done." Her heart beat faster. She opened the envelope and pulled out a neatly organized packet of printed pages, each one listing a different program. South Mesa Youth Outreach Initiative, Rise Again Recovery Program, Brothers of the Bridge Mentorship Network. Dozens of them, each with a short mission statement beneath the title. Support for foster youth, re-entry support for teens aging out of the system, trauma-informed shelters, scholarships. Her eyes landed on one in particular, the Rosie Fund, a program aimed at supporting single mothers who had grown up in foster care. She covered her mouth with her hand. The year the program was founded? 2015. The same year Rosie was born. She flipped the page. Beneath the listing was a quote, "For the ones who never knew they were wanted." Something broke inside her. Tears spilled before she could stop them. She wasn't just a name in a file. She wasn't someone forgotten or lost to the system. Someone had carried her in their heart all this time. Someone had turned that pain into something real, tangible, life-saving. Jonah hadn't stopped looking. He had simply started building a world where no child would feel like she once had. Emily pressed her fingers to her lips and whispered his name again. "Jonah." She stood up and went to the bookshelf where she kept the journals, years of them. She pulled out a volume from 5 years ago, the year Rosie had started preschool. She flipped to the back where she always left a page blank for a wish. On it, in blue ink, were the words, "I just want to know if someone ever loved me before Rosie." Her breath hitched. Now she knew. She went back to the envelope. Tucked in the bottom corner was a printed photograph. Jonah, older now, standing beside a group of kids, all of them in matching blue t-shirts, with the name of one of the programs on it. He had one arm draped over a teenager's shoulder. That smile again. She knew what she had to do. The hesitation that once held her back dissolved into something else, urgency. She picked up her phone, then paused. Was he ready, after all these years? She didn't know. But now, for the first time in her life, she was. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The house was still, save for the quiet hum of Rosie's fan in the next room. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the documents and photos spread around her like puzzle pieces, the journal open in her lap. She reread every line of the social programs Jonah had helped create. She traced his face with her eyes in the photograph, memorizing the lines of age and care, the years of searching etched quietly into his expression. There were so many questions. Why hadn't he found her? Why hadn't anyone told her he existed? But another question rose louder in her chest. How had he survived the loss and still chosen to give so much? At 2:17 a.m., she opened a new page in her journal and began to write, not to herself this time, but to him. Dear Jonah, I think you've been looking for me longer than I've been looking for you. I don't know why we were separated. I don't know why no one told us we had each other. But tonight, I read your story through the lives you saved. And for the first time, I saw myself in someone else's care. You didn't just believe in me. You believed in every child like me. That means you carried us all these years. Thank you. I hope I get to say that out loud someday. Emily. She closed the journal gently, pressing her hand over the cover. In the morning, she would reach out. She didn't know what he would say. She didn't even know if he'd answer. But she needed him to know that the girl in the photo, the baby with wide eyes and the arms of a protective brother, had grown up. She had survived. And now, because of him, she was ready to live. Emily stood and turned out the lamp. The living room fell into darkness, but inside her, something had quietly lit up. Not rage, not pain, hope. Outside, parked just across the street, a man in a hoodie watched the light in her apartment go out. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His part in this story had always been silent. But as Keanu Reeves sat alone beneath the sodium royal street lamp, he allowed himself a small smile. She had found the name she never knew, and she was about to find something even bigger. Family. That night, after Rosie had fallen asleep with a crayon still in her hand, Emily sat by the window with her journal open and her laptop glowing softly beside her. She hadn't written anything yet, just stared at the blinking cursor in the comment box of a quiet blog she'd found months ago. It was anonymous, filled with hundreds of people sharing heartbreaks, memories, and strange little turning points. She hadn't posted there before, only read. But now, under the title, "If you had one shot to reach the family you lost, what would you say?" Her fingers hovered above the keys. She didn't even know what she wanted to say, or to whom. Her thoughts went back to that boy in the photo. Jonah. The name tasted foreign and familiar at the same time. Her mother's name, Lena, had floated like a ghost through the corners of her life, but Jonah, he was flesh and memory. Someone who had once held her. Someone who might still remember. On the forum, people were already responding to the prompt. One post said, "I'd ask if they ever thought of me, even once, even accidentally." Another wrote, "I'd tell them I never stopped hoping, not for a second." Emily's eyes watered at that one. A user who went by Silent Roots posted, "I once left a message in a library book, hoping someone would find it. That person became my brother again. Don't underestimate the echoes we leave." She swallowed hard, her throat tightened, and she rested her hands in her lap, afraid that typing anything might break her in half. Keanu, on the other side of the country, sat at his own desk. The prompt was his, typed out hours earlier and scheduled to go live while he was filming in New York. But now he was wide awake, rereading the answers as they came in. He recognized the rhythm of one post instantly, the hesitant line breaks, the lowercase start. A voice that had appeared once before in the comment section, never signed. "I don't know your name," the comment began, "but I think you were holding me in that picture." I think you were the last person who knew me before I forgot everything. If you remember me, even the smallest thing, please write it down somewhere. I'll find it. It wasn't signed. No username was attached, but Keanu leaned closer to the screen, his finger brushing the glass. He didn't need confirmation. It was Emily. And something about the way she wrote, the quiet in her words, the gentleness underneath them, hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back, hand resting on his heart for a moment, and whispered the only thing he could say aloud. He's still hoping. Emily closed her laptop slowly, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed the lid shut. The screen went dark, but the words she had written glowed inside her. It felt like shouting into a canyon, hoping an echo would come back. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. But she turned off the lamp beside the couch and walked softly toward Rosie's room. Her daughter was curled into a ball, the small stuffed fox Emily had stitched back together, resting in the crook of her arm. She bent down, brushed a strand of hair away from Rosie's cheek, and whispered, "I'm trying to find us more." The next morning, the sun hit the floor in broken slats through the blinds. Emily made toast and sat in silence as Rosie played with a sticker book at the table. Something inside her had shifted. She couldn't describe it, but her chest didn't feel as heavy. She'd carried a weight for so long, she hadn't noticed how deep it had settled. Rosie looked up. "Are we going to have a family someday?" Emily blinked. "We already are, honey." "No, I mean more people, like other families at school." Emily hesitated, then she nodded. "I think maybe we will." Later that day, Keanu stared at the comment again. He hadn't touched the keyboard in hours. He'd gone out, taken a walk, passed by a small bookstore, and bought nothing. But he kept thinking about what she'd written, and what she didn't say. The longing between the lines, the strength it took to write them. He opened a private folder on his desktop labeled Connections. It was where he kept files, things he'd found, names he'd matched, moments he couldn't forget. Jonah's profile was there. A list of the social programs he'd launched, the shelters he'd quietly funded, the youth center he'd helped build after his foster brother took his own life. And Emily. She was in there now too. Her photo from the diner's website, a scanned copy of her foster placement file he'd received from a friend who still had access to closed archives, all of it piecing itself together like a puzzle that had waited decades to be solved. He leaned forward and typed a message into a document. Not to send, not yet, just to have the words ready. Sometimes families lose each other, but sometimes they keep looking. You both kept looking. He saved it, closed the laptop, sat still for a while. Then he reached for his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, a journalist he trusted. Not to publish, but to verify one final detail. He didn't say much, just gave her a name and a year, and then he waited. The response came by nightfall. Keanu sat on a bench outside the diner, the one where Emily first waited on him. The air was still, the neon sign above flickering faintly, casting red and white glows across the empty parking lot. His phone buzzed softly in his coat pocket. In text, from the journalist. Confirmed, Jonah Michael Reyes, born 1986. Mother, Lena Reyes. Sibling listed in sealed file, female, born 1992. Relinquished at birth, no name recorded. There it was. The confirmation he'd waited for. The paper trail that finally told the truth they'd been circling around. Emily and Jonah, brother and sister, torn apart by circumstance, but never truly lost. Keanu stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button, before finally typing back, "Thank you. That's all I needed." He didn't need to say what came next. That part was already in motion. Back at home, Emily sat with her journal open. She wasn't writing, just tracing the words she'd already written with her fingertip. Her post still hung in the online thread, unread by anyone she knew. Anonymous. Bare. Honest. She didn't know that somewhere out there, someone had already read it and felt every word like a spark. She didn't know that her brother had also written one that night. And she didn't know that in a matter of days, someone would quietly hand-deliver an envelope to Jonah's office. No name on the return address, just a receipt, folded once. On the back, written in the same hand as before, "You've been searching, so has she." As Keanu stood and walked into the night, he felt a weight lift. He hadn't solved their story. That wasn't his role. He was just the bridge, the messenger, the spark that finally touched the fuse. He didn't know if they'd find each other soon or years from now, but now they could, because someone had dared to write. Someone had dared to answer, and that's where stories like these always begin. Emily sat at the kitchen table long after Rosie had gone to sleep, the glow of her laptop screen painting soft shadows across the small room. Her fingers hovered over the keys, heart pounding. The photo Ms. Rios had given her, the one of a toddler version of herself cradled in the arms of a boy, was pinned to the wall beside her, a silent encouragement. She had written, rewritten, and deleted a dozen drafts of the email. Finally, she hit send. The reply came within minutes. "Is this really you? I've been searching for 30 years. Please, can we meet?" Emily stared at the message, tears pooling in her eyes. She responded with one word: yes. They agreed to meet in Santa Fe, halfway between Jonah's apartment in Arizona and Emily's quiet life in New Mexico. She took the day off work, packed a lunch for Rosie, and dressed carefully, even though she didn't know what to expect. In the car, Rosie chattered excitedly about everything and nothing. Emily kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping the makeup would hide how nervous she looked. They pulled into the cafe parking lot early. Emily's palms were slick with sweat as she spotted a man already sitting on the patio, clutching a folded piece of paper like it was the only thing keeping him steady. His hair was grayer than the boy in the photo, and he looked older than he probably was. Life had clearly taken its toll. But the moment their eyes met, there was a flicker, recognition blooming in disbelief. Emily stepped out of the car, her knees trembling. Rosie held tightly to her hand. Jonah stood slowly. "Emily?" His voice cracked. She nodded. "Jonah." He crossed the distance with hesitant steps, stopping just short of her. His eyes, red and wide, scanned her face like trying to remember someone from a dream. Then he let out a soft, broken laugh. "I thought you were gone forever." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't even know you existed." They stood like that for a moment, the air thick with everything that hadn't been said in decades. Then Rosie, still holding her mom's hand, looked up at Jonah and simply said, "Are you my uncle?" Jonah's breath caught. Emily smiled through tears. "Yes, sweetheart, this is your Uncle Jonah." Rosie stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. No hesitation, just love. Jonah crouched slowly, returning Rosie's hug like he was afraid she might vanish. His eyes brimmed as he whispered, "I always dreamed I'd meet you both someday. I just didn't think it would ever really happen." They sat at an outside table under a striped awning, the spring breeze carrying the scent of coffee and sun-warmed stone. The waitress brought waters, and Jonah smiled as Rosie stirred sugar into hers with serious concentration. "She looks just like you did when you were little," he said, eyes still flicking back and forth between Emily and the old photo he'd brought. "Same determined eyebrows." Emily laughed softly, still a little guarded. "You kept that photo all these years?" Jonah nodded, brushing his thumb over the corner. "It's all I had left after they separated us. I was 5. I remember your crying. I remember Mom screaming. I didn't understand what was happening, just that one day you were gone." Emily looked down. "I wish I remembered more. My file just said relinquished at birth. No names, no explanations." Jonah swallowed hard. "Mom was young, barely 16 when she had you. Our father wasn't around. There was a lot of pressure. They said she couldn't keep you without risking losing both of us to the system. She gave me up, Emily said quietly. She was forced to. I didn't know where they took you. I asked every year on my birthday. I asked on yours too. He smiled sadly. Even when they stopped answering. Emily's voice cracked. I used to imagine someone was out there thinking about me. I wrote to an imaginary family in my journal growing up. On holidays, on my birthday. Jonah blinked hard, his voice thick. I did the same thing. I wrote letters I never sent. I guess part of me always knew you were still out there. Rosie climbed into Emily's lap and looked between them. So, are we a family now? Emily tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. Yes, baby. We always were. We just didn't know it yet. Jonah took a slow breath and reached across the table. Emily hesitated for a beat, then placed her hand in his. I want to know everything, she said. He smiled for the first time, not just out of disbelief, but something warmer. Then let's start now. They talked for hours, slowly reconstructing a history that had almost been lost. Names, birthdays, half-remembered songs. Jonah showed photos of his home, the youth center he helped build, the mural painted in the hallway that read, "No one is too lost to find." Emily stared at the mural image for a long moment. That's what you do now? Help kids like us? Yeah, Jonah said, his voice soft with pride. Because no kid should feel like they've been erased. Emily looked at Rosie, then back at Jonah. Thank you for never stopping. He smiled. I couldn't. Later that evening, they walked through downtown Santa Fe. The golden hour wrapped the adobe walls in soft light, and Rosie skipped between them, humming tunelessly. Emily kept glancing sideways at Jonah, as if trying to believe he was real. They passed a street musician playing a Spanish guitar. Jonah stopped for a moment, pulling a few bills from his wallet and dropping them in the open case. Music always makes the world feel more honest, he murmured. Emily nodded. My daughter? She sings when she thinks no one's listening. That's how I knew she was okay, even on our worst days. Rosie tugged at Jonah's sleeve. Will you come visit us, where we live? Jonah crouched beside her. I'd like nothing more, if your mom's okay with it. Emily didn't hesitate. Your family. You have a right to know her, and she deserves to know you. For a long time, none of them spoke. They just stood in the stillness, the weight of so many silent years starting to lift. Across the street, Keanu watched from beneath the brim of his cap. He stood just out of sight, hands in his jacket pockets. When Rosie took Jonah's hand again, Keanu exhaled, a quiet smile touching his lips. He turned and walked away, unnoticed. Back at the hotel that night, Emily opened her journal. The pages were always meant for a family she never knew. Now she began writing to someone real. His name is Jonah, my brother. He cried when he saw me. Rosie hugged him like she always knew. I think I did too. She closed the journal, heart fuller than it had ever been. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a question looking for an answer. She felt found. The bell above the diner door jingled, soft and familiar. Emily looked up from behind the counter where she was restocking napkins and froze. Jonah stood there, the same nervous energy as the first time they met, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Comfort, recognition, a fragile kind of peace. He scanned the space as if it were sacred. So this is where it happened? He asked quietly. Emily nodded, smiling. Right over there, she said, gesturing to the booth in the far corner. He always sat there, ordered tea, never said much. Jonah walked slowly across the floor, brushing his fingers along the edge of the counter as he passed. The cook waved from the kitchen. A waitress smiled and mouthed, You must be Jonah. He gave a shy wave back, then eased into the booth. The vinyl creaked beneath his weight, and for a moment he just sat there, silent, eyes closed. Emily joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She knew. "I still can't believe he left that note," Jonah said, holding the ceramic cup between his hands. "It's like something out of a movie." Emily chuckled. "Yeah, well, my life hasn't exactly followed a normal script." They sipped quietly. Outside, the desert wind rolled against the windows, the sky deepening with soft streaks of dusk. Jonah set his cup down and leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Do you remember anything about Albuquerque?" she asked. Jonah's brow furrowed. He nodded slowly. "Bits and pieces. We lived with our mom in a small apartment. She wasn't well. I don't know what happened really, just one day she was gone. I was 6. They told me she ran off, that she left us." Emily looked down. Her hand grazed the rim of her cup. "I never knew her name." Jonah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrinkled photograph. The same one Ms. Rios had shown her. A boy, holding a toddler in a faded onesie, both of them looking slightly confused, but tethered to each other by something invisible and strong. "She called you Emmy," Jonah said, voice cracking. "I used to push you around in a laundry basket. You'd laugh so hard, like it was the best ride in the world." Emily blinked fast. Her throat tightened. "I wish I remembered that." Jonah looked around the diner again. I think someone wanted us to remember for each other." She followed his gaze to the corner booth, now shadowed in the amber light of evening. A space that had once held only mystery now felt full. The cook came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a stained towel. "So you're Emily's brother, huh?" he said with a grin. "Took you long enough." Jonah stood up and shook his hand. "Guilty as charged." Emily laughed from behind the counter. "He's harmless, just nosy." The cook winked. "That's how we keep families together in this town." Jonah looked around again, taking in the faded photos pinned near the register. Birthdays, regulars, staff over the years. There was one picture of Rosie, toothy grin and frosting on her cheek, with Emily kneeling beside her. A homemade birthday party captured in fluorescent diner lighting. "She looks like you," Jonah said softly, pointing at the photo. Emily's eyes softened. "She asks me all the time why we don't have grandparents, aunts, uncles. Now I get to tell her something real." Jonah hesitated. "You don't have to tell her everything." "I want to," she replied. "I want her to know she comes from something, even if it broke before it could hold us." He nodded slowly. "I think that's brave." They sat again, back in the booth where the note was once left. Jonah ran a hand along the scratched tabletop, his fingers pausing over a small crack in the laminate. "I was thinking about what you asked earlier," he said. "About 1992. That year, I remember being lost. After our mom disappeared, I ended up with a foster couple in the city. They weren't bad people, but I didn't talk for weeks. I used to sit on the curb in front of their building and stare at the road." Emily watched him closely, as if searching for pieces of herself in his words. "Home day," Jonah continued. "A man stopped. Didn't ask my name, just sat down next to me, gave me a sandwich, said, 'You're not forgotten, kid. Someone out there's waiting for you too.' Then he left. I never saw him again." Emily felt a chill run through her. Jonah leaned back. "That sandwich? It changed something. I went back inside, started speaking again. They called it a breakthrough. But it was just one stranger, doing one kind thing." They were silent for a long moment. The clock ticked above the register. A car rolled by outside, headlights casting soft shadows on the window blinds. Then Emily said, "Whoever he was, he saved me too, just later." Jonah met her eyes. And maybe he was saving all of us, in his own way. Emily didn't speak. She just reached across the table and took her brother's hand in hers. Outside, the booth's window reflected their silhouettes. 2 people once torn apart, now sharing coffee, memories, and something stronger, the beginnings of a restored family. Later that night, after the last customer left and Rosie had fallen asleep in the booth with a crayon still in her hand, Emily and Jonah stepped outside into the cool desert air. The neon sign buzzed above them. Ruthie's Diner flickering slightly on the R. Jonah looked up. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Emily folded her arms and smiled. "Every Tuesday, but then Wednesday comes and someone like you walks in." He chuckled. "Touche." She leaned against the wall, gazing down the quiet road. "Sometimes I think this town is like a forgotten song, just waiting for someone to remember the melody." Jonah nodded thoughtfully. "Or maybe someone already did, and we're just hearing it now." There was a pause, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I think he was watching all along," Emily said quietly. "Not in a creepy way, just like someone who knew the pain of losing something important." Jonah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small paper scrap. "This fell out of the package he left you. I didn't want to open it, but..." Emily unfolded it. There were only 3 words, written in the same hand that had signed the receipt weeks before. "Keep building bridges." She blinked hard. "He knew?" "Yeah," Jonah whispered. "He really did." They stood there for a while, 2 silhouettes under the diner sign, not rushing to go back inside, not afraid of the dark. Finally, Emily turned to Jonah. "Do you think Mom's still out there?" Jonah looked away, then back at her. "I don't know. But I think someone wanted us to start looking. Not backward, but forward." She nodded slowly. "Then let's do it. For Rosie, for whoever helped us get here." Inside, Rosie stirred in her sleep. The crayon rolled onto the floor, forgotten. But the drawing she had made, a simple image of 3 stick figures holding hands under a heart, remained. Later, Emily slipped it into her journal, between the photo of Jonah as a boy and the receipt that had started it all. Emily didn't know what made her do it that morning. Maybe it was the silence after breakfast, or the way Rosie had quietly colored a picture of 3 people holding hands and left it beside the sugar bowl. But after Jonah left to grab coffee from the place across town, she went to the shelf in her bedroom, reached behind a stack of folded towels, and pulled out the old leather-bound journal she'd been keeping since she was 19. She set them gently on the kitchen table like they were sacred. In a way, they were. Each page was filled with letters, not to anyone specific, but always written to someone she believed might have existed. She'd written to a brother she never knew, to a mother whose face she'd never seen, to a father she doubted had stayed. The journals were stitched together with longing and hope, and every once in a while, pain that spilled out in ink. When Jonah returned, she gestured to the pile. "There, yours too, I think." He hesitated, then sat down. He opened the first one and began to read. For the next hour, there was no sound in the room but the soft rustle of pages and the occasional catch of breath. He read her memories of growing up in strange homes, her imagined birthday parties with invisible siblings, the nights she'd begged God for a single answer. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "I wish I'd known," he said, voice cracking. "I wish I could have read these 20 years ago." Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You couldn't, but you're reading them now." Jonah swallowed and then, with a shaky breath, reached into his coat pocket. "There's something I need to show you too." He handed her an old, creased envelope. Her name was written on it in cursive, Emily Ann, with a tiny heart drawn under the "Y." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was delicate, unfamiliar, but something in it stirred the back of her memory. She read silently. "If you find each other, know I always loved you both, even when I couldn't stay. Lena." Emily clutched the letter to her chest. Her shoulders shook. Jonah got up and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin lightly on her head. "She left that with her case file before she passed in 2014, he said softly. "She made them promise, If you ever showed up, that you'd get it. Tears spilled from Emily's eyes as she whispered, "She remembered me." Jonah nodded. She never stopped. Emily's fingers trembled as she turned the envelope Jonah had placed in front of her. The paper had yellowed with time and the corners were worn, as if it had been carried around in a wallet or pocket for years. She took a breath and opened it carefully, sliding out a single page filled with slanted, rushed handwriting. Jonah watched her with a quiet ache in his eyes, unsure if he should speak or let her take it in at her own pace. She began reading aloud, her voice cracking. "To my children, if this ever finds you, know I never stopped loving you. I was young, scared, and no one believed I could raise 2 babies on my own. They told me giving you up was the best thing I could do, but my heart never stopped breaking. I kept pictures, dates, names, until the day I couldn't anymore. If you find each other, please remember me, not as someone who left, but someone who had no choice. Love always, Lena." Tears streamed down Emily's face before she even finished the last sentence. Jonah wiped his own eyes. The silence between them held a different weight now, one filled with understanding, not emptiness. Jonah said softly, "I found that after she passed. It was buried in her file. She made the caseworker promise to keep it safe in case we ever came looking." Emily folded the letter and held it to her chest. "I spent my whole life wondering why, and now I know." She looked at Jonah, the brother who had once held her in a photo and searched for her ever since. They weren't strangers anymore. They were the family she had always written to in her journals, the one she dreamed existed but could never quite reach. And now, they were here. That evening, as the desert sun melted behind the horizon and long shadows stretched over the porch of Emily's small home, she and Jonah sat side by side, the journal and letter between them. Rosie was inside, humming to herself as she colored, the same tune she often sang before bed. Jonah smiled every time he heard it. It reminded him of something he couldn't name, but had always felt, a sense of being home. Emily flipped to the final pages of her journal. Once blank, now waiting, she passed the pen to Jonah. "Would you write something?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then leaned forward. On the last page, beneath her final entry, he wrote in firm but trembling strokes, "I looked for you in every face that resembled hope. I never stopped. Now that you're here, I won't let go again." They didn't speak after that. There was no need to. The words they had both longed to say had finally been written. Not for the world, but for each other. Later that night, as Jonah tucked Rosie in and read her a bedtime story, Emily stood at the window and looked out at the quiet street. The wind stirred the curtains, carrying with it a strange peace. Then, in the distance, she saw him. A man in a hoodie, standing by the edge of the parking lot, not coming closer, not moving away, just watching with calm, steady eyes. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Keanu gave the faintest nod, turned, and walked into the shadows. Emily closed the journal one final time, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you." The page was complete, but their story was just beginning. Keanu sat quietly in the dim light of his apartment, the glow of his laptop reflecting in his eyes. The world outside was still, but his heart was full. The story he'd quietly watched unfold, the waitress, the brother, the folded receipt, had settled somewhere deep in him. He logged into the anonymous blog he used when he wanted to listen instead of speak. He typed the prompt slowly, as if each word had weight. If someone found you after a lifetime apart, what would you say? Then he hit post, leaned back, and waited. The replies came gradually at first. A few hearts, a handful of comments, then dozens more. One user wrote, "I'd ask if they ever thought of me, because I never stopped thinking of them, not one day." Another, "I'd tell them I forgave them, Even if I was never given a reason, we all get lost. That doesn't mean we stop loving. Keanu read each one carefully, pausing often. Some were lighthearted. Siblings reunited through DNA kits, cousins discovered after funerals. But others were raw. "I don't want to ask anything," one reply said. "I just want to sit with them and not feel alone anymore." One comment in particular made him freeze. It read, "I'd say, I missed you in every silent moment. Every night I tucked myself in, wondering if you ever looked up at the same stars." He read that line 3 times. He imagined Emily writing something like that. Maybe she had. Maybe she hadn't needed to. Keanu bookmarked the post. He didn't know who wrote it, but somehow he felt like he did. Keanu leaned forward, scrolling through more responses as the thread grew longer. Each message was a quiet testament to the human heart, its ability to wait, to ache, and to forgive. One reply simply said, "I'd ask, did you know I waited by the window every birthday?" Another came from a user with no profile photo. "She found me after 32 years. We didn't talk about the missing time. We just made pancakes. That was enough." Keanu smiled. He thought about Emily, the way she poured her pain into journals, the way her daughter, Rosie, clung to her as if her arms were the whole world. He thought about Jonah's tears in the diner and the old envelope with their mother's handwriting, how it had bridged a gap no lawyer or judge ever could. The screen refreshed again. One new comment blinked into view. It said, "To the stranger who gave me my family back. I don't know your name, but I think you saved my life." Keanu stared at it for a long time. It wasn't signed. It could have been anyone. But in his heart, he felt it might have come from someone who'd sat in the booth across from him. Or maybe it came from someone halfway across the world. It didn't matter. The sentiment was the same. He bookmarked it, quietly, and closed the laptop. Sometimes, silence was the only sound love needed. That night, Keanu stepped outside into the stillness of the desert air. The New Mexico sky stretched endlessly above him, freckled with stars, and he stood there in quiet reflection. His mind drifted, not to fame or film sets, but to the tiny moments that didn't make headline. A folded receipt, a faded photograph, a stranger's comment typed at midnight. He walked to the edge of the gravel path where his motorcycle waited. Before mounting, he took a small notebook from his jacket pocket. It was worn and weathered, filled with fragments and phrases he had written over the years. Thoughts that never became speeches, feelings that never became posts. He flipped to a blank page. Then, beneath the light of the moon, he wrote just one sentence. "Sometimes the greatest things we ever do are the ones no one knows about." He folded the notebook shut and slipped it away. Back inside the diner, the booth he had once occupied sat empty, but not forgotten. Emily had started calling it the booth that changed everything. Staff left it untouched during shifts, a quiet tribute. Rosie even drew a picture of it, hanging on the wall with crayon stars above it. No one ever asked Keanu for credit, and he never asked for thanks. Some bridges are built without blueprints. Some reunions happen not in loud celebrations, but in the soft silence of understanding. And some strangers remain strangers forever, except to the hearts they helped stitch back together. The rain had just started when Emily stepped out onto the diner floor for the early shift, her apron wrinkled and eyes heavy from lack of sleep. The air was thick with the scent of bacon and coffee, the usual clatter of plates muffled by the weather outside. She didn't expect him to be there again. But he was. In the corner booth, the same one he always chose, sat the man in the faded hoodie and cap. Steam rose from his tea, untouched. His gaze rested out the window, as if waiting for something, or someone. Emily froze for a second, then gathered herself and walked over. He looked up just before she spoke, his eyes kind, steady. "You came back," she said, barely above a whisper. He smiled. "You found him." She blinked. It was you, wasn't it? The tip, the note." He tilted his head, a faint shrug. "Does it matter?" Emily let out a soft laugh, part disbelief, part release. Her voice cracked. "It matters to me." There was a pause that held years inside it. "You didn't have to," she added, "but you did. You changed everything." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a small napkin, folded it once, then slid it across the table. "Some things, they're meant to be found," he said gently. Then he stood, nodding once, and turned to leave. Emily picked up the napkin with trembling fingers. On it, in the same handwriting from the receipt, were the words, "The path brought you pain, but it also brought you here." She pressed the napkin to her chest. Outside, the rain had picked up. She watched him cross the parking lot, blending into the morning fog. He didn't look back, but she did. She looked around at the diner, the place that had once felt like the end of her story, now becoming its turning point. Emily slipped the folded napkin into the back pocket of her journal, the one she hadn't touched since meeting Jonah. Somehow she knew she wouldn't be writing in it the same way again. That little booth, where loneliness used to sit like a second customer, now held something sacred. She walked slowly back to the counter, but her mind stayed in the conversation. His voice, calm, grounded, echoed louder than the words themselves. "You found him." The other waitresses didn't notice anything unusual. The cook just nodded toward the door. "Quiet guy, always leaves big tips. Drinks the same tea. What's his name again?" Emily hesitated. "I think I ever knew." She returned to her shift, pouring coffee, taking orders, wiping down tables. But the world had tilted slightly. Her past hadn't disappeared. It hadn't healed overnight. But it finally made sense. The pieces had rearranged into something she could hold without it hurting. Later that afternoon, after the rain had cleared, she took Rosie to the park. They sat on a bench, watching the clouds break open for the sun. Rosie leaned against her shoulder and looked up. "Was that the man you told me about?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. "Yeah, baby. That was him." "Was he the one who helped you find Uncle Jonah?" Emily looked at her daughter's big, searching eyes. She nodded again, this time slower. Rosie smiled. "He looked kind." "I fail leaves me today, is it?" Emily said. "He's the kind of person who helps and doesn't wait to be thanked." They sat there for a long time, quiet but not alone. That evening, when Rosie fell asleep, Emily returned to the booth after closing. She brought her journal and laid it on the table. Across from her, an empty seat. She placed a cup of tea on the opposite side anyway. She opened to the first blank page and wrote, "Dear Kay, I don't know who you are, but I know what you did. You gave me my brother. You gave my daughter a future. And you gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have, a reason to believe. I came from something good. I won't chase your name, but if you ever come back, there will always be tea waiting in this booth." She signed it with her name and folded the letter once. Then she placed it under the saucer where the napkin had been. It was enough to know that if he ever returned, he would find it. The next morning, the booth was empty again. The saucer was still there, but the folded letter was gone. Emily didn't ask who took it. She didn't have to. Life at the diner returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. Customers still came and went. The coffee still brewed. But in the quiet corners, Emily saw things differently now, more clearly. Every stranger could be someone's missing piece. Every folded napkin, every forgotten receipt, held the possibility of a message meant to be found. Jonah visited often now. He and Rosie played board games at the counter while Emily worked. They were slowly building the family that had once been torn apart by silence and circumstance. There were awkward pauses, stories half remembered or half told, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the warmth between them, the trust that was beginning to take root. One evening, as Emily wiped down the same booth, she noticed something new, etched faintly into the wooden table's edge, barely visible unless you were looking for it. A single word. No. She ran her fingers across it and smiled. Not all stories needed a signature. Not all angels needed wings. She didn't know if she'd ever see the man in the hoodie again. Maybe he had other people to help, other families to mend. But a part of her believed, no, knew, that he hadn't just passed through. He had left something behind. Something unshakable. A bridge. Emily closed the diner that night a little slower than usual. She turned off the lights one by one. Then, before locking up, she placed a fresh cup of tea at the quiet booth. Just in case. If he ever came back, he'd know the seat was still his. Because sometimes, the people who change your life the most don't stay long. They just show you the way home and trust you to walk the rest of it yourself. The light in Emily's small living room was soft that morning, filtered through the lace curtains Rosie had chosen. A tiny beam caught the edge of the photo frame Emily had just finished setting on the mantel. Inside it was a moment, frozen, gentle, and impossibly real. Jonah sat cross-legged on the carpet with Rosie curled against his side, both mid-laugh over a spilled bowl of popcorn. Emily had taken it from across the room, not even realizing how precious it would become, and she adjusted the angle slightly, wiping away a smudge on the glass. Beside it, she placed another frame. This one was more complicated. It was a grainy photo snapped by the diner's cook, who always fancied himself a part-time photographer. In it, the corner booth sat empty, almost. If you looked closely near the window's reflection, you could make out the faint outline of a man in a hoodie. His face wasn't visible, not fully, but Emily knew. She would always know. She'd written a small label for the frame in pen and taped it below the glass. The man who sat still long enough for us to find each other. Rosie had insisted on decorating the edge of the frame. She'd picked out her favorite stickers from a half-torn sheet, a purple flower, a tiny planet, and a smiling sun. When she was done, she placed the frame next to the other and whispered, "He was kind." Emily had nodded, unable to speak. She didn't know why the photo comforted her so much. Maybe it was the mystery, or maybe it was the steady presence behind it. The fact that someone, anyone, had cared enough to watch, to guide, and then to leave without applause. Jonah had offered to stay for the weekend. It was the first time in years Emily had heard laughter echo through her home in a way that didn't feel forced. Rosie had taken to him instantly, crawling into his lap as if she'd always belonged there. And maybe she had. Maybe some families just take a little longer to find. Later that afternoon, Jonah had found Emily in the kitchen, stirring tea with a spoon that had long lost its shine. He'd looked at the frames and said nothing at first. Then quietly, "I think she'd be proud of you." Emily hadn't needed to ask who she was. Their mother's letter was tucked inside a drawer now, folded carefully, read a dozen times. It wasn't the apology that stuck with her. It was the sentence, "If you find each other, know I always loved you both." That line had wrapped itself around every wound she hadn't even known was still open. The kettle began to whistle. Emily smiled. "I hope so." She poured the tea and handed Jonah a cup. "To finding each other," she said. He raised his mug, and to the ones who stayed invisible just long enough to lead us home. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the tiny New Mexico town sank into its usual hush, Emily sat on the porch with her journal in her lap. She hadn't written in it since the day she met Jonah, unsure what words could possibly hold the weight of everything that had happened. Now, under the soft glow of the porch light, she turned to a fresh page. "Dear stranger," she wrote, "I don't know your full name, I don't know how you knew, but I know this. Without you, I'd still be staring at the same walls, wondering why I felt so incomplete." She paused, eyes misty. From inside, she could hear Jonah helping Rosie with a bedtime story. Their voices, one deep and patient, the other small and full of wonder, blended into a song of belonging. "I don't need answers," Emily continued. "I don't even need a goodbye, just thank you for the receipt, for the silence, for seeing a girl who had nothing left to hope for and choosing not to walk away." She folded the page, not to hide it but to preserve it. It wasn't a letter meant to be sent. It was a bookmark in a story that had just begun. Jonah stepped outside a few minutes later, settling beside her without a word. They sat in easy quiet, sipping tea and watching the last traces of daylight vanish behind the hills. It wasn't the kind of sunset that demanded attention. It was soft, muted, the kind you only noticed if you were really looking. Emily figured that's how some people were too. "There's something else I didn't tell you," Jonah said after a while. "Back in '92, after Mom disappeared, I was placed with a foster couple in Albuquerque. They weren't cruel, just distant. One day I wandered off and got lost at a gas station." Emily turned to him, surprised. "What happened?" "A man found me, sat with me for hours until someone came looking. He didn't ask for thanks, he just said." Jonah smiled faintly. "You're not lost, you're just on your way." "I never forgot that." Emily felt a chill move through her. Not fear, but recognition. Jonah glanced toward the photo inside, the one with Keanu's outline caught near the window. "I think maybe he never really stopped sitting with people." They said nothing more that night. But when Jonah went to bed, Emily stayed outside a while longer, staring up at the stars. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for answers, but for grace. For strangers who wait in silence, for paths that cross because someone dared to care, and for the man in the corner booth, who never asked for a thank you, but left the world just a little more whole than he found it. The next day, Rosie asked if they could go back to the diner. She wanted pancakes, she said, but Emily knew it wasn't just about the pancakes. It was about the booth. The three of them walked in together, Emily, Rosie, and Jonah, and were greeted with the usual warmth. The cook grinned. One of the other waitresses waved. But it was Rosie who walked with purpose. She headed straight for the old booth in the corner, the one with the long window and the small crack in the vinyl seat. "Can we sit here?" she asked. Emily nodded, and the three of them settled in. It felt strange at first, too quiet, too sacred. But then the waitress brought menus, and Rosie started talking about her new drawing for school, and Jonah shared a story about his casework, and the booth slowly became something new. Not just a place of mystery, a place of memory. After breakfast, Emily handed the cook a small envelope. "Can you keep this behind the counter?" she asked, "just in case he ever comes back." Inside was a photo, the three of them smiling in that very booth. On the back, Emily had written, "Because of you, we found our way." The cook nodded solemnly and tucked it safely under the register. As they left, Rosie tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Do you think he'll see it?" she asked. Emily smiled. "If he does, he'll understand." Outside, the sky was that soft morning blue, the kind that promises something more. Jonah picked up Rosie, carrying her on his shoulders as they strolled down the sidewalk. Emily walked beside them, not behind, not apart, just with them. She glanced once more at the diner's window, and there, in the reflection, just for a moment, was the faint outline of a man with kind eyes, sitting alone at a corner booth, tea in hand. When she turned, he was gone, but Emily didn't chase after him this time. She didn't need to. He had already given her everything. At home, that evening, she and Rosie added one final thing to the living room wall. Next to the framed photo of Jonah and Rosie, beside the blurry one of Keanu, they hung the note from the receipt, carefully unfolded and pressed flat in a glass frame. It didn't shout. It whispered, "Ask your mother about Albuquerque, 1992. Beneath it, Rosie had added another sticker. This time, a small heart. Red. Simple. True. Emily smiled as she traced it gently with her finger, then turned out the light. Jonah stood at the stove, tasting the simmering chili with a careful flick of his wrist. The kitchen was a mess in that joyful, lived-in way. A half-sliced onion on the counter, laughter drifting in from the living room, and Rosie's tiny sneakers parked by the door like she owned the place. It was the first time in years he'd cooked for more than himself and his partner, but this time was different. This dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a declaration. A quiet vow that the family they'd thought they'd never find was finally, undeniably here. Emily arrived with Rosie just before sunset. The light hit her face as she walked through the door, and for a brief second, Jonah saw her not as the woman who'd survived alone all those years, but as the little girl from the photograph he had clutched in silence for half his life. The toddler with big eyes and chubby hands, the sister who was taken before she could remember his name. She looked around the house. Pictures of Jonah's partner and their foster kids on the mantel, a welcome banner hung a little crooked, and a vase of daisies on the table. Rosie skipped ahead, already asking where she could sit. Jonah stepped forward, nervous and proud, and took the casserole dish from Emily's hands. "Welcome home," he said softly. She smiled back. "It feels like one." As the evening unfolded, the house filled with people. A few teenagers from the mentoring program came by, bringing dessert and jokes. Jonah's partner, Michael, handed out drinks while sneaking bites of cornbread from the stove. The laughter grew louder, the space warmer, until it felt like something sacred was being rebuilt in real time. Dinner was simple: chili, bread, roasted vegetables, but it didn't need anything fancy. Around that table were souls who had all, in some way, been lost and then found again, and that kind of company didn't ask for anything more than presence. At one point, Rosie climbed into Jonah's lap without asking. She curled into him, sleepy from food and joy. Jonah froze for a second, then wrapped his arms around her. Across the table, Emily watched, her eyes welling but not spilling. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Near the end of the meal, Jonah cleared his throat. "There's something I want to share," he said, reaching into the drawer beside him. He pulled out a small cassette recorder, old and scratched, and set it gently on the table. Michael looked up. Emily leaned in. Jonah pressed play. A voice crackled through the static. It was fragile, worn, but unmistakably a mother's. "I don't know where you are," it said, "but I hope this finds you. I love you, always." The message ended in a faint click. Silence fell over the table. No one moved. Even the kids, mid-bite or mid-giggle, seemed to feel the gravity of the moment. Rosie blinked up from Jonah's lap, sensing that something important had just happened. Something bigger than words. Emily's hands were frozen on her glass. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no sound came out. Finally, she breathed, "Where did you get that?" Jonah took a moment before answering. "It was in her file," he said quietly. "She recorded it just after she signed the papers. I guess, maybe she thought someone would give it to us one day." Emily lowered her gaze to the recorder. The voice still echoed inside her, soft, cracked, unsure. She didn't remember that voice. She'd never known it. And yet, something inside her recognized it, like a song heard once long ago that still lives in the corners of memory. "She was just a girl," Jonah added, 16, alone, no support. "Our grandparents wanted nothing to do with her. And after she gave you up, she disappeared for a while." Emily nodded slowly. "And then?" "She came back," Jonah said, his voice heavy. "Got clean, worked nights, wrote letters. I found out later she tried to get you back, but by then, the system had already moved you through 3 homes. They wouldn't let her see you." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, not for herself, but for a girl she never met, whose life had unraveled long before she ever had a chance to hold her daughter. "I hated her," she whispered. All those years. I told myself she didn't care, that she left me and never looked back. Jonah reached for her hand. She did look back, Emily. Every single day. Rosie, still curled into Jonah, looked up and asked gently, "Was that my grandma?" Emily smiled through the tears. "Yeah, baby. That was your grandma." Rosie didn't say anything else. She just leaned her head against Jonah's chest and sighed, as if the answer had closed something inside her, too. Michael brought out a pie and began slicing it quietly. No one really wanted dessert, but everyone took a piece, because sometimes you eat not out of hunger, but because it's how you stay together at the table just a little longer. Jonah lifted his glass again. "To second chances," he said. Everyone raised theirs. Emily's voice was soft but clear. "To the people who wait for us, even when they're gone." And for a few long, beautiful seconds, no one spoke. They just looked at each other and held the moment still. Like a photograph you never want to take, because some memories deserve to live in motion. As night settled outside the small adobe home, the flicker of candlelight on the dinner table glowed like embers of something sacred. Laughter slowly returned, soft at first, then full-bodied as the children began joking about who got the biggest slice of pie. Rosie insisted hers was smaller and made an exaggerated pout until Jonah promised her an extra scoop of ice cream next time. The heaviness of the voicemail had lifted, replaced by something gentler. Connection. Emily found herself studying Jonah's movements. The way he gently helped a shy foster boy clean up his plate, how he knelt down to whisper encouragement to a girl afraid to speak. This man, this brother, was shaped by the same pain she had carried, yet turned it into something redemptive. She realized then that this dinner wasn't just a reunion. It was a beginning. After the kids had gone to the living room with coloring books and soft music played in the background, Emily stood to help clear the table. Jonah stopped her. "Leave it," he said with a smile. "Stay a little longer." They sat again, just the two of them, now with warm mugs of tea replacing empty wine glasses. "I used to dream of this," Emily confessed. "Not the voicemail, not even knowing where I came from. Just this. A table, a family, somewhere to bring Rosie where I didn't have to be strong every second." "You don't have to anymore," Jonah said gently. "We're here." She nodded, blinking away the tears before they spilled again. "You said Mom wrote letters?" Jonah reached into a drawer nearby and pulled out a small bundle tied with blue ribbon. He placed it between them. "She didn't send them, but she wrote them." Emily hesitated, then untied the ribbon slowly, like unwrapping something fragile and holy. The first page was yellowed but neat, her mother's handwriting looping carefully. "Dear Emily, I don't know who will raise you, but I hope they sing to you. I hope you laugh loudly even if no one else does. And if someday you wonder who I was, just know I wondered about you every day." Emily pressed the letter to her chest, inhaling deeply. "She didn't leave because she didn't care," she whispered. "No," Jonah said, eyes misting. "She left because she had no choice, but she loved us. That's what matters." Rosie peeked around the corner, rubbing her eyes. "Can we go home, Mama?" Emily scooped her up gently. "We're already home, sweetheart." Jonah reached out as they stood. "Come back Friday, same time. There'll be music." Emily smiled. "We wouldn't miss it." As they stepped out into the cool desert night, Emily held her daughter a little tighter. The stars stretched wide across the sky, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small beneath them. She felt found. The morning light filtered softly through the diner's front window as Emily stood on a step stool behind the counter. In her hands, she held a simple black shadow box. Inside it lay a single folded receipt. Yellowed slightly from time, the ink faded but still legible. Below it, she'd pinned a tiny brass plaque freshly engraved reading, "For the stranger who left a tip that became a home." Her fingers trembled as she fastened the frame onto the wall above the register. It wasn't just decor. It was the beginning of everything. It was the first crack in the silence that had surrounded her past, her whole life. The receipt that once made her heart race now sat behind glass like a sacred relic. Rosie came up behind her, holding a small paper flower she had made in school. "Can we add this?" she asked, lifting the pink and yellow bloom. Emily smiled and nodded, gently opening the frame one last time. She slid the flower beside the receipt and closed the box. By the time the diner opened for breakfast, the frame was already catching attention. A retired trucker leaned in to read the plaque, scratching his beard. "What's the story behind that?" he asked. Emily, pouring him coffee, just smiled. "Some things just find their way back." Word spread faster than she expected. Regulars asked. New customers pointed. One even snapped a photo. But Emily never gave the full story. She liked it that way. Let the mystery live where it belonged, in the hearts of those who needed it most. Jonah came in just before lunch rush. He'd heard about the shadow box from a friend who saw it on a local blog. He leaned on the counter, squinting up at the display. "You really did it," he said softly. "I had to," Emily replied. "It's the start of everything." He touched the edge of the frame with reverence. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" She looked out the window for a long time. "Maybe. Maybe not. But he's part of this place now." Jonah nodded. "You know, this diner feels different now. Warmer. Like it knows something." Emily laughed gently. "It does. It knows what finding someone feels like." In the afternoon lull, Rosie helped her mother polish the glass with a soft rag. "Is he a hero?" she asked. Emily paused, then answered carefully. "He didn't save us, Rosie. He showed us where to look." The next day, Emily brought in a small photo of her and Jonah from their first weekend together. They'd taken Rosie to a sunflower field just outside of town. She tucked the photo into the corner of the display, behind the counter. Below the receipt, beside the flower. It wasn't for customers. It was for her. A reminder that even the smallest moment, the smallest clue, could change a life. A woman in her 60s walked in during the lunch shift. Emily had never seen her before. She ordered a coffee and sat silently at the counter. Her eyes kept drifting toward the shadow box. "Drew?" the woman asked suddenly, pointing. Emily paused. "Yes, every word." The woman nodded slowly. "I gave up my son when I was 16. All these years I thought maybe he forgot. Maybe it didn't matter." Her eyes welled up. "Now I wonder." Emily reached across the counter and gently touched the woman's hand. "It matters. More than you'll ever know." That evening, after closing, Jonah stopped by with 3 foster teens in tow, 2 boys, 1 girl. They'd been living at a transitional home he supported. He bought them all dinner and told Emily, quietly, they could use a little hope tonight. Emily brought out slices of warm pie and waved off their offers to pay. When one of the boys noticed the framed receipt, he asked, "What's that?" Jonah looked at Emily, letting her decide. She crouched down to their level and said softly, "That's the receipt that changed everything. A stranger left it. And because of him, I found my brother. We found each other." The kids fell silent. Then one of them whispered, "Wish someone would leave something like that for me." Emily smiled gently. "Maybe they already did. You just haven't found it yet." Later that night, Rosie asked why they didn't put up a picture of Keanu. "Because it's not about who he is," Emily said. "It's about what he gave. And he didn't want attention. He just wanted us to be okay." She tucked Rosie into bed and sat alone for a while, the receipt glowing faintly in the dim lights of the diner. It didn't matter that most people would never know what it meant. What mattered was that she did, and that she was no longer alone. Outside, a man in a hoodie passed by the window but didn't come in. He paused for a moment, hand brushing the glass as he looked at the framed receipt. Then he smiled, soft, full of peace, and kept walking. The next morning, a tourist couple from Colorado sat near the counter and pointed at the display. "Is that for some kind of charity?" the man asked. Emily, busy refilling coffee, shook her head with a smile. "Not exactly." The woman leaned closer. "So what is it?" Emily paused. She glanced at the receipt, then at Rosie coloring quietly in the corner booth, and back at the customers. "It's for a moment," she said. "A moment that changed everything for my family. A stranger left that, and because of it, I found someone I never even knew I lost." The couple fell quiet. The woman wiped her eye. "That's beautiful." "It was more than beautiful," Emily said softly. "It was right. It was exactly what we needed, even if we didn't know it." Later that day, a young waitress named Tara, new to the diner, asked if she could take a photo of the shadow box. Emily nodded. Tara said, "I want to remember this, in case I ever wonder if something small could still matter." That night, after everyone left and the dishes were done, Emily locked the doors and stood before the receipt one more time. She pressed her fingers to the glass. Just for a second, not to ask anything, not to say anything, to see, just to feel the presence of the one who had left it. Behind her, Jonah turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the display. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Some stories didn't need retelling. They just needed remembering. Emily stepped back, took Rosie's small hand, and walked out into the night, the bell above the diner door chiming one last time behind them. From the hill across the road, someone stood watching. Not close enough to be seen, but close enough to know he had come back, just to check, just to make sure. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, Keanu Reeves turned away, hands in his pockets, and disappeared into the cool, amber-lit horizon. Behind him, the diner stood glowing under the desert sky, and above the register, the receipt that changed everything waited silently, bearing witness to the truth. That sometimes, all it takes is one small act to bring a family home. The sun dipped low over the desert horizon, casting long golden streaks across the diner's worn floors. Emily stood behind the register, wiping down the counter for the third time, even though it was already spotless. The bell above the door hadn't rung in nearly 20 minutes. The stillness gave her time to think. Framed above her head, the receipt in the shadow box caught a beam of amber light. Customers always asked about it, about the plaque that read, "For the stranger who left a tip that became a home." And she always gave them the same smile, the same soft answer. Some things just find their way back. But tonight, that memory pressed heavier than usual. She reached under the counter and pulled out her journal. The last few months had been filled with reunions and laughter, but tonight she flipped back to older pages, pages filled with questions, prayers, letters to a mother she never met, a brother she never knew. She let her fingers rest there. Rosie padded out from the kitchen, a blanket around her shoulders, and leaned against the counter. "Mommy, why do people leave notes?" Emily closed the book slowly. "Sometimes," she said, "it's the only way to say something when you can't be there in person." Rosie thought about that, her little brows furrowed. Then she said, "I think the man who gave you that note must have been really kind." Emily smiled. He was. Just then, the diner door opened briefly. A breeze swept through. No one was there. But folded neatly on the welcome mat was a plain white envelope. Emily picked it up with careful hands, as if it might disappear. Inside was a single sentence, written in familiar handwriting. "Sometimes, the family we're looking for is just waiting for the right note." She looked up, out into the dusky parking lot. No one, just wind and warm light. She held the paper close, heart full and quiet. Later that evening, Emily locked up the diner, the keys jingling softly as she stepped into the warm night. The stars were beginning to scatter across the sky, quiet and constant, like the people who had come and gone in her life but never truly disappeared. Rosie walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. When they got home, Jonah was already there, sitting on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders, sipping from a chipped mug. He stood when he saw them, arms open. Rosie ran to him. Emily handed him the envelope. "Another note," she said. He read it slowly, then nodded. He's still watching. They didn't need to say his name. The man who had never introduced himself. The one who had sat in silence, who had left folded receipts and one-liners that shattered lives open just enough to let the light in. Inside the house, Rosie climbed into bed and asked if she could write a letter too. Emily gave her paper and watched her scribble carefully. When she finished, she held it up proudly. "A says thank you for finding us." Emily kissed her daughter's forehead. "It's perfect." Downstairs, the TV was off, the lights dimmed. Jonah sat beside the receipt, still framed above the kitchen table. His eyes were red, but peaceful. Emily joined him. "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Jonah shrugged. "Maybe not, but it doesn't matter, does it?" "No," he said, "because he gave us each other." They sat in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but full. Then the screen fades to black and a voice speaks. Sometimes all it takes is a message, a folded slip of paper, or a silent act of kindness to bring a family back together. What would you write on a note to someone you've never met, but always missed? Share your story in the comments. Next video tease: an empty school, a forgotten piano, and the letter that made Keanu Reeves uncover a teacher's sacrifice no one else remembered.